What Happens Off the Field, A Solid Cry for Help, and Social Work's Response by Julia Hartman, MSW, LSW from LaSalle University. Let's welcome Ms. Hartman.
Hi, I'm Julia Hartman. I am affiliated with LaSalle, but I currently live in Nashville, Tennessee. I work for Vanderbilt University Medical Center in their neurosurgery department. As you can see on my program, Byron Stingley, my partner, who was also my main subject and my interviewee, is in the National Football League, and he was supposed to be here today, but he's not. And I'll talk about that more in the presentation, why he is not here. So I'm going to just talk about a little background on what goes on kind of behind the scenes in the NFL and what the transition out is like. And again, that's just from his experience and how he explained it to me. I was playing social worker and asking every question. That's very uncomfortable. So here's a couple pictures of during the football season. I'll give you guys kind of a glimpse into our life and how we met. So I met Byron at the very end of his off season with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I met him when I was living in Los Angeles. And it was a fairy tale type of story. Met in a restaurant and swept me off my feet and would show up at my door with a bouquet of flowers and a convertible Bentley and took me to all the finest restaurants and places I never thought I could eat on a social work salary. And really did a lot of great things together. We would travel and always have breakfast in Malibu beaches and all that. After dating for some time, we decided long distance was just a pain, so I moved to Nashville and left beautiful Los Angeles, which I still miss to this day. But I left LA, moved to Nashville, and he signed with the New York Giants, and I went to New York then while he was in training camp. And then at the last practice of his preseason, he suffered a concussion that put him on injured reserve for about 6 weeks into the season. And at the end of his 6 weeks, he was released from the New York Giants and sent back to Nashville. So we packed up everything, went back, and at first it was like, okay, it's fine, I'll get a call from another team, something will happen. 1 month goes by, no call. Next month goes by, no call. December, January, season's done, no call. And that kind of was the downward spiral for him and really dealing with facing the transition now, and he started to get really depressed. We even had moments where we were talking about putting him in, trying to get him inpatient psych treatment. They got really severe. And it was difficult because he's a celebrity and naturally played for the Titans for 3 years. So do you really want to go into inpatient treatment there where a lot of people know you? Not really, but do you want to pay $40,000 for a treatment facility somewhere else when you're not employed? So I did have an after picture of him, but he asked me not to show it. It wasn't very good. So here's the good photos. So I wanted to share this quote with you guys. When I asked him what football felt like to him playing and now not playing, he said this. He said, football is like taking a wild animal, raising him in the zoo. You feed him, keep him on a set schedule, and then release him into the wild and expect him to survive. And that's how his take is on it. So why is this such a vulnerable population? A lot of times when we talk about that, people say, all right, they're athletes, they make a lot of money. How are they vulnerable? They're free from social problems. Well, in Sports Illustrated, an article in 2009 said that by the time they've been retired for 2 years, 78% of former NFL players have gone bankrupt or are under financial stress because of joblessness or divorce. So I always want to point that one out because that's a very big number. So when I wanted to kind of dig a little bit deeper in what playing was like for him when he was in the league and how it affected him, one of the things that he noted was that there's such a pressure to perform at an elite level at all times. And the concern that if you don't perform at that level constantly, you will lose your job. And it's not like you get a warning, it's like you're not going to get signed again. So when you're feeling that, you're feeling all the pressures and the criticisms from the media, owners, managers, coaches, and even your own family, and then you've got fans cursing you out on the sidelines, you're like, okay, I'm constantly feeling anxious. Well, how do players cope with the anxiety and the feelings of depression? More often than not, substance abuse and other negative behaviors like frequenting different types of strip clubs, having affairs, things of that nature is what he saw going on and what a lot of people would turn to. one thing he said was that there's no sick days in the NFL, so you always have to be on. And if you're sick, you better really be sick to get a day off. So one of the other things that we discussed briefly was racism in the NFL, and that kind of came up with everything going on with Kaepernick and that whole recent story in the news. And we talked about how majority of the owners in the NFL are white, wealthy men, and you are disposable to them at any point. So they hold your livelihood in their hand, and at any point you can be disposed of. And that's kind of difficult to deal with. And he experienced sometimes in the locker room where he felt like coaches would talk to the white players like they're the brain, and the African American players like they're the brawn. So they were the athletic ones, but the white guys know what they're doing, you know, as far as strategic wise. And that was really difficult. Culturally, in his experience growing up, he said, I was groomed to go into the league. I was groomed to be an athlete. My family told me, this is what you will do. You will be an athlete. That's how you'll make money. So there was no discussion of, you can be a doctor, you can be a lawyer, you can be something else. How he grew up was, you need to get into the league. And when you do, you need to take care of all of us, because we raised you and now we earned it. And even to this day, his family still calls and asks for money. Neighbors call, cousins call, fake cousins call. And that's a struggle now too. And it's their transition out for them and trying to understand, well, what do you mean you can't give me a couple thousand? I don't understand. So that was another thing that stood out to him. So the transition out of the league, one thing that I actually, to note Diana Rowan mentioned earlier in her TED Talk, the loss of identity. That's the first thing that comes to mind. For a lot of players, their whole identity is wrapped up in this game. They've been playing for how long? Some from Pee Wee leagues, most from junior high and high school, and their whole identity is pretty much in the game. They're grieving this loss. They put their blood, sweat, and tears into the sport, and there's no closure. And that's something that he said, I feel like there's no closure. It's like you're cut and that's it. There's no more discussion about it. We see a lot of depression, anxiety, and aggression that's becoming more heightened after the transition out. And I think a lot of that comes from also the unknown, the fear. Where is my next paycheck going to come from? I feel like I'm starting from scratch. I feel like I'm just graduating college. What do I do? Because a lot of these guys had very rigid structured schedules for so long. Mm-hmm. So they're told when to eat, when to sleep, when to get up, what to do every day. They don't have the discussion of, oh, this is how you write a cover letter, this is how you do a resume. It's like, this is the schedule you focus on and that's it. And you're not thinking about what's next because you're in the moment of trying to focus on the sport. He mentioned he feels like an outcast, just a guy on the streets, which he said was a sort of slang that they use in the locker room. If someone was not playing anymore, they're just a guy on the streets now. One thing that really made me actually feel bad for him, he's my partner who I talk to every day about this, said to him it feels like you're losing your superpowers. You're a 6'5", 300-pound guy who's used to manhandling people for a living, and now you're in the grocery store pushing a shopping cart. And people say, hey, you look like you play football. Did you play? Oh, well, I did. It's a bruise to the ego for him. So we talked about mental health in the NFL, and he said concussions are talked about, not mental health. Concussions are the focus, which is important and needs to be focused on. But depression, anxiety, they didn't talk about. They said don't be in the training room. You don't want to be seen in the training room, and that's where the medical staff is. That's where you would get the help that you need, in the training room. But if you're seen too often in the training room, you're considered to be injured. You don't want to seem injured. Is there a clinician on staff? I asked. Yeah, there's a clinician on staff, but you hear about the person once, like a mental health clinician, you hear about them once your rookie year, you never go to see them again. So they're there, but nobody uses it. And then I know personally, he's asked for medication before, but medical staff has never checked in with him. So he said, I'm feeling really depressed, I think I need some help, and they'll say, oh, okay, they get him a script, give him some medicine. Not let me refer you out, not why don't you see the clinician, none of that. It's just take this medicine, get back out there. That's it, end of discussion. A big thing that I've noticed across the board with some of his friends that I've met, and even him, there's a resistance to treatment. I think there's a fear of looking vulnerable to everyone, not just your teammates or your coaches, I think to family too. I think that there needs to be more mental health clinical staff. I don't think one person is enough for 53 people. And then there's a lot of lack of education surrounding mental health. And then we talked about cultural beliefs. So again, for an African American family, it was never talked about. It still isn't talked about. His father has no idea how severe his depression is. He calls it stress. That's it. There's absolutely no discussion, and they don't understand it from his family's perspective, so they have no idea how detrimental it can be. So really, I want this to be a call to action for social workers. So how can we intervene? We have this information, we're hearing so many things, but what are the next steps? So one of the things that I was thinking was we need to advocate for better mental health programs at the collegiate and professional athlete level. So not just, we need to start when they're playing in college. Advocate for additional mental health staff. And then one of the ideas that Byron came up with was provide players with mandatory therapeutic sessions. So they have to see the therapist on staff, and it's mandatory or you get fined. That's one of the ways to help with decreasing the resistance, because then they all have to go in, they have no choice. And that way maybe it can trigger, oh hey, something really is going on with me. And then provide mental health education to collegiate and professional athletes so that there's a better awareness. And then implement career counseling as soon as the player is cut. Doesn't mean you don't know if you're gonna get a call again, but you get connected with a career counselor. So then that way, you have someone in your corner that says, let me teach you how to do a cover letter, let me teach you how to do a resume, personality assessments, all those type of things. And then another thing Byron came up with was designate an alumni athlete with a collegiate level athlete. So they can sit down, tell them what's going on, whether they went pro or didn't, and help them and say, hey, this is the bad side of things, this is what it could look like, because you get really caught up in the good. And that's what he said to me. He said, you get so caught up in the good of everything, you don't know the other side of it, and you need to be better prepared. So that is it for that. Do you guys have any questions? Yes?
Absolutely great presentation.
Thank you.
I guess a statement and a question. Based on his explanation when he got released and he was waiting for that call, I was a professional baseball player, and when I got cut out of the minor leagues, it was out the blue, right? So what he described, the analogy of the bear and the wildlife, it was similar. I think the only difference was I kind of prepped myself because I had a ruptured Achilles tendon when I was drafted, so I knew that my shelf life, or how they view my shelf life, is different, right? So I kind of prepared myself for what I was going to do after I finished playing. But still, that feeling of afterwards and what you're going to do. So luckily I already had my bachelor's when I got released, and soon after I went into the military. So I kind of engaged in the plan already. But the NFL is different, right? It's a different income bracket, it's a different lifestyle.
Yeah.
So I thought that was like amazing just how you described it. But also, I guess my question, who do you think the onus of, or the responsibility, where it lies in terms of prepping athletes for life after, or that time where you just suddenly, is it the organization or is it the collegiate institution? So should that fall on the athletes individually, or the organizations, or the colleges?
I think that it falls on the collegiate level and the organization. I think both. It needs to be reiterated if you go pro, because again, that can end at any point. But I think at the collegiate level, it's really important because a lot of student athletes, that's their focus, right? It's just the sport, and that's what they're thinking about. And many student athletes, their goal is to go pro afterwards. Some are preparing and say, okay, I might not go pro, but I'm going to do this now. But I think it's really important to begin that talk of, hey, like, if you don't go pro because it's a slim chance or whatever, let's figure out what we can do to help you really prepare for your career and get that jump start. Because a lot of focus goes into sports, and student athletes know that. That's the big bulk of your focus is, you miss classes for games, and you miss out on a lot of things, and you're up at 5 or 4 a.m. running and everything, so that's a huge focus. I think it goes for both organization and collegiate. Anyone else? Yes?
I love those ideas of having a career counselor for when they get released and having a mentor in place for the collegiate student athletes. Do you know of any teams or programs that have that in place currently?
I don't know of any teams or programs that have that, but I would love to explore that further. These are just ideas that we were kind of brainstorming with, and I want to explore more. I don't know if anyone else. Did you?
Well, I did a study at South Carolina, and there is that, basically interviewed former collegiate athletes, and there is that, one of the things that we heard over and over again was that demand for some sort of ongoing services to help. Like, there is the whole idea, we've invested in you, you've invested in us, we've given our time to this university. And it's like, but I think too the struggle is like how far, what's the timeline for how long, is it the university's responsibility or the NFL, like how, you know, is it 2 years, is it 5 years, is it,
Right.
you know, trying to figure out what's appropriate. And like that's productive and also is beneficial. And
Exactly.
and also I personally think too, if you give a lot of those guys 2 years to come back, or, you know, especially from a psychosocial development side, but also even if they go out and they can say that this university impacted my life not just on the field but off the field.
Right.
I mean, you know, your donor base is going to be, whether they make a lot of money or not, that buy-in I think needs to be there. And surprisingly, one of the strongest resources that we found in our study was the athletic alumni associations at the universities. They're like, we know we can throw events, we can support guys, but it's like, you tell us what to do or how you can help us, and we'll, you know, what information you need to make this work. So it's like, do you make it organically through through an organization like that, or do you like kind of make it an extension of the university at large?
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
almost like a post-career, you know, career services.
Right. Sorry, I know you guys had your hands up back there.
Yeah, mine's just real quick. It's more in response to what Danny brought up earlier. But at the University of Michigan, one of the things that we do have is we have an MPEC program. We also have a leadership and development program. So from when freshmen first start to when people graduate, they have access to our career center.
Oh, okay.
It goes through resume building, linking people to internships. They talk about financial literacy and all of that to help prepare people to transition out or to transition into professional careers.
That's great.
So I think that this is great to start this conversation. I was a professional athlete for 6 years, and luckily found a passion that kind of drove me into social work. But I'm currently working with the USSC and with USA Swimming to talk about that idea of what happens after you're done. And we've done surveys and we've looked at kind of current athletes. And the biggest thing is, like, hindsight's 20/20. So when you're done, you can say, I wish I had all these things. But how do you get an athlete to invest in an experience that they haven't experienced yet?
Right.
And so that's where we're finding barriers. And yeah, we can provide all these resources, but nobody's utilizing them because they're like, well, this isn't going to happen to me. It's not an experience that I'm going to experience.
Right.
So what kind of education can we do when it's not something that people are invested in because they want to focus so much on their sport?
Right. I think it helps to have players come in that used to play, or retired players come in and talk about their experience. Say, this is really real. This is what I'm facing now. This is how I feel. People who are open to doing that, to give them, you know, that experience. Yes.
Quick question: are there any resources available through like the NFL Players Association or the NFL kind of retired Players Association that could, you know, probably assist guys going through the same types of issues?
So it's interesting because we've run into some interesting experiences with that. We've gotten all the brochures, like, you know, if you need this mental health treatment, call this number, and that's been a number that's not very helpful. And then we've also called the Player Association for help with, you know, career counseling, and they kind of give them the runaround. The advice was, if you want to be a chef, you just got to go in the back of the kitchen and ask the chef how they got the job. That was their career advice. But interestingly enough, they started a program called the Bridge to Success for retired athletes, and we are going to that soon. And that's for helping players and their spouses transition out of the league and set them up with some different career opportunities, hopefully, like give them on-site interviews and things of that nature. So it's fairly new, I believe, but that's through the Players Association. Yes.
This is super interesting because I've worked with a lot of football players, and someone said hindsight's 20/20, but there's a lot of research that looks like stereotype threat and academic achievement and achievement gap, especially with persons of color and males of color. So like, I'm wondering, because we have career services too, and I think the biggest complaint from our life skills coordinators is that people don't use them. Or like they don't want to use them. Whereas I think like perhaps maybe some of the unexplored content is that there's that stereotype threat that could also be part of it, that like there's those negative stereotypes that the labeling pieces, and I come in to identify as an academic. I see quite a few of my football players engage in self-sabotaging behaviors because they're feeling like they shouldn't be identifying too strongly as a student. So I'm wondering more so positing that as like has anyone else seen that? Is that a topic that other departments have explored? I know the University of Washington trained some of their academic personnel on that and in an effort to help identify programming and things of that nature.
Sorry, I know I went over time, so.
That's quite all right. That's quite all right. It's here for people to ask questions and learn and everything else.
Do you want me to take a couple more questions, or should we?
Oh, it was, she from North Carolina, so.
Oh, okay, so you got that. And then my email's up here too, if you guys
Yeah,
want
I
to
just
send me
wrote
an
it
email.
down. I was going to say, one of your suggestions was having someone at the school and making it a requirement, so to speak. And so I have been working with North Carolina Central University. They received a grant from the NCAA for a program they established. And over the summer, the students who came into that program, I saw all of them individually 3 times. So everybody knew they were coming to see Miss D. And when they see me on campus, they hug me. I'm at their games, I'm texting them, I'm telling, you know. So that's the way it was established. And I do believe that works better because everybody, volleyball, softball, volleyball, football, basketball, no matter what your sport was, you had to come and see Miss D.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. I think that's what we need more of, for sure. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, just to kind of answer one of the questions, like Emmett and myself are lucky enough to work at the University of Texas, where we have a very, very robust behavioral health program. And part of that is the clinical side, which has been built fairly well, and we don't mandate athletes to utilize it, but we actually have a lot of athletes that do utilize it. And we've been able to get a lot of support from coaches that encourage them. And so I have found that the students that are mandated are more resistant to the students that aren't. And then myself and Emmett have been working on the development side of piece that has more of the mentorship and more of like things to help injured athletes and you know, like we have the injured athlete group and things like that. So programs are out there, they're just far and few in between, but luckily UT's like super lets us be, they encourage us to build the program the way we want it to be built.
That's great.
So.
That's great, yes.
I was just thinking, just in response to what you're saying, I wonder if it would be different. When I was thinking about this, the idea of mandating, I thought, you know, that we traditionally think no, like that, and that would definitely be a resisting group. And I could see what you're saying, and I could see on a college level, collegiate level, that might still be the case. I don't know, but I wonder if it's different in pro ball, where, you know, just in terms of development, that idea, well, we're all in this together, and we all have to do it. We might not like it, but it's part of the deal, and it normalizes it. I don't know.
It's like adolescent, don't tell me what to do.
Exactly, and I don't know. It'd be interesting.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
While Jerry's getting set up here, I just want to, I didn't see my colleague over there, Ashley. I think Ashley was out getting a cookie. Where were you, Ashley? Earlier, but that's Ashley Wallace. She's my colleague at the University of Texas at Austin. She has a new long title that I still haven't remembered. Assistant Director of
Clinical Behavioral Health.
Clinical Behavioral Health. You know, every time I go into a meeting, whether it's with development or whether we're in a meeting with, you know, our athletic department or compliance, you know, I always say to folks that, and I don't know how Ashley feels about this, but I always say she's a social worker, You know, sort of like you know, sometimes you hear players say he's a player and she's a player's coach. And I'm just really happy and very blessed to have working beside Ashley, you know, because she has quite a caseload and she coordinates our mental health services, but at the same time, she's been outstanding in terms of helping me develop our injured athletes group and our substance use prevention programming and eventually our transition program. Ashley's been there. I know when she sees me coming to her office, she's like, oh my God, he's gonna ask me to do something else. It's not in my job description. But she has been quite a blessing to work with.